This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board. Today is August the 27th, 2017, and this is the Prairie Monk, WEFT's weekly look at the environment, rails, trails, and greenways. We're going to be talking about rails and trails, I'm positive, today, because a spectacular event.
Whoops, turn on your mic, Dave. Rails, trails, and greenways, that's what we're here for today, and I'm Dave on the board, and it is, again, August 27th, 2017.
Okay, just a few notes while I'm encountering them right outside the building. Salvage, styrofoam can now be recycled. I'm not sure of all the details, but the Solo Cup organization, which has been replaced by someone else, and I'm not quite sure who, but if you go down Lyriman Avenue in Urbana, you can recycle styrofoam. And that's a big breakthrough. Normally, to recycle styrofoam, you had to take it to Chicago or Indianapolis. I think it's melted down some, but to transport it, you're transporting a lot of nothing, and that takes a lot of road expense and labor expense and all the rest of it. So we don't tend to do it, but if we can do it locally, that is wonderful. Still have people who put full boxes into the cardboard dumpster, and I wish they would carry a box knife and just cut the material up to size and spread it out evenly so it's not tented inside, so we get the maximum ability of a dumpster to work. Students are returning, so there's lots of boxes and things that get thrown out. But there is also, the YMCA especially has been gathering up semi-trailer loads of furniture and the like that is gathered when people leave town at the end of the semester, and then it's liberated in the fall when people come back in. I'm not quite sure where the pickup is, but certainly it's important. There is so much stuff being recycled that the Habitat for Humanity is just overloaded, and they've decided to put materials with a date on them so that if they don't last more than 3 weeks or something like that, they get dumped. Part of the problem is that no one can afford the storage. Just this week we'll have return, and so that mountain of material will go down. Goodwill does the same sort of thing, but they do it on certain items. It's like clothing. You'll have a red, green, and blue annotation on them so that they don't hang around forever. But some pieces of equipment are the sort of things that stay for much longer than 3 weeks, and how to deal with that is quite a problem. But a knife is a knife, or a piece of equipment like glass, or there are some things that you might have to wait for 6 months before someone picks them up, and that's a challenge. Habitat for Humanity has done very well. Goodwill does well. Salvation Army has done pretty well too. All those recycling joints have to be applauded. I've been seeing carpeting go out that I think could be recycled. But carpeting is heavy. You need a front end loader or something to lift it, and it needs to match the people, and that's the sort of thing that doesn't always sell immediately. But carpets do sell. They're expensive enough that recycling is good. Well, the Kickapoo Trail opened on Friday afternoon, and David may have some comment here. He was in the audience. we were honored with a dedication for our early work with Heartland Pathways to get this trail into action, and I really think that the trail would not be there if we hadn't done that. CCDC wanted to take over and did so, but it's taken a long time to get into action. So this trail has been 20 years getting into action. The speeches were emceed by Turpin and Jane DeLuce, and they had scripts that said a lot about what our trail is about. The emphasis was on recreation, but if people were listening, that was information that they needed to hear. And then there was some dedication and appreciation of people who have donated, and some big donations. And then people rode the trail. I got to talk to so many people I couldn't believe. I missed the cutting of the string. Part of it was the gentleman and his wife who run Jimmy John's had put in a lot of help at the time when it was needed, and so he was part of the cutting of the ribbon, plus the forest preserves on either end, the forest preserve on the Champlain end and the Vermilion County Conservation District on the other end. And David, you might, as an audience participant, you might have some comment.
Sure. The dedication ceremony itself was about a half an hour long. If people are interested, they can go online to YouTube, and if you just check for Urbana Television Kickapoo Trail, you should find the video, which someone we know has already put up. Jason was there and was taking the video, and so you can see the entirety of the dedication ceremony, including at the 22-minute mark where Dave is on stage and gets his plaque. And again, then it cuts to the actual cutting of the ribbon, and they cut away before the outpouring of dozens of bicyclists heading back on the trail. There's something when people write lengthy things online, they've started to put the letters TLDR, too long, didn't read. If you want the brief version of something, if you're at all interested in getting out and walking, or especially bicycling, get on this trail. It was fantastic to take the 7 miles each way to St. Joe and back. It's got a kind of a gritty, it's crushed limestone for the surface of it, which I was concerned about. I have bike tires that are not quite an inch thick and they have no tread on them. That's on purpose, because the idea is when I'm in town here, I can go. I've measured this, the sort of person that I am. I can pedal just 10 times to go the entire length of a block here in town. That's because there's little enough friction between my bike tires and the road. Well, imagine putting yourself on something that's essentially dirt for 7 miles. You can do it. I was cautious for the first half of the trip getting to St. Joe, but by the time I got there, I was really, really comfortable. It's nice to see. It doesn't look very different from what you're used to seeing around here. You've got cornfields and you've got soybeans, and every once in a while there's a grain elevator like at Fulls, but you know, it's something different. It's a way to get around. It's a way to get some exercise that we haven't had before. It's actually a nice 15-mile round trip to get from here. And if you're interested in getting there from St. Joe, it's very, very simple. I forget the name of the grocery store. It's like an IGA or something like that. It's right there on one of the main streets, and it just has a sign that says, you know, here's where the thing starts, and it's all nice and paved. From Urbana, there's nothing really there to tell you, except they've now put up a sign that says, bicycles here. And if you know the place where Main Street in Urbana meets with University Avenue, where University curves right into it or whatever, that's exactly the point where this bike trail starts. And it's a nice straight trail, very, very flat. The only changes are when you come to bridges a couple of times or culverts, bridges over small culverts. It changes just a little bit, but the surface is beautiful even for skinny-tired bicycles, and it's especially great if you do have hybrid bicycles, even mountain bikes and things like that. It would be great exercise, and it was a lot of fun. There is actually a thing, it doesn't actually say Heartland Pathways on it, but you can see where they're planning for there to be a nice patch of prairie plants, because there's actually a nice little thing you can stop and read that tells you about the prairie that used to be here and that they're hoping will come back. There's also another one of these things, informative placards at the Fulls elevator to tell you about the fact that the Fulls something is right there. So again, that's the long version of it. If you're interested in getting out there, I can highly, highly, highly recommend it. And no matter what kind of bike you have, if you're comfortable on your bike, you will probably be comfortable on this trail.
So you have a link. Is that mean it is up on YouTube already?
Yes, I already watched it yesterday. If you check your email.
On YouTube?
Yes.
A link is not the same as YouTube, right?
Okay, if you go to YouTube, in my case, because I watch the videos that have UPTV videos pretty regularly, when you're logged in, YouTube will hand you things it expects that you will like. So right there on my front page, it showed me the latest thing that UPTV had put up. If you don't normally go to YouTube, if you type in UPTV Kickapoo, that will probably bring you up a page of videos. And I'm sure at this point, one of the very first things that you'll see will be the UPTV video of the dedication ceremony for the Kickapoo Trail.
And that can be visited around the world.
That's true.
So it can go to my relatives in Australia.
That's right. No matter where you are, no matter what time you're interested, you can go to YouTube and watch that video.
So it may not, I was thinking to run this right now because we have a different population of people listening, perhaps. And I would, but if it's up there on YouTube, I think we're in shape.
I will tell you, this is something that I felt while I was standing there. They didn't coordinate their speeches. Many people went back and basically said the same thing. You really don't need to sit engrossed by every 20, all 24, 20, 30 minutes of it. The views and opinions expressed are solely those of the speakers. But several times people did. The gentleman from the Forest Preserve, I think, who's the one of the main people, he spoke at great length about the history of Rails to Trails and how this project got started. But yes, that was pretty much what other people had said in pieces. But it's worth checking out. Feel free to skim. I did.
I think there's a lot of information there that has broader connotations. So I think that population included quite a few people who were really supporters. But there were also people there that are encountering a rail trail for the first time. You have to know that this is a very popular federal move to preserve railroad beds. The unfortunate part of it is that these are mostly on sort of not major railroads. So if you're going between St. Louis and Chicago or New York, they're main lines. So some of the main lines have been decapitated, and then they're not likely to come back quickly. But so it's assumed that this is preserving a rail right away. The problem occurs that this federal government was observing that they were losing so many rail connections that would not be hunky-dory for the future. So realizing that this would cost a tremendous amount to replace a railroad right-of-way in the future, and having seen bicyclists buying these corridors, they provide money, in this case $12 million, and they quiet titles and preserve the bridges which are mandated to come out. So all those things get together, and you have a very popular rail trail. We only have one in East Central Illinois, and this is it. But other states have a lot of these trails, especially Wisconsin. Minnesota has them. Indiana. East Central Illinois has been strong on replacing the rail beds with corn and soybeans. So it's an economic thing and a debate. But some of these corridors are certainly being preserved. We are losing one 30-mile unit through Oakland, Arcola, Lovington right now. And part of what is happening here is that you're getting people to realize the value of this site. So the rural sociology, the economics, just the nicety of the vegetation. We're losing our genetic material so fast that only 0.01% of the prairie remnants have been preserved. And so these rights of way are pretty unique. The fear of the railroaders is that this is so popular that it's very difficult to get a return to rail. This is happening in the Chicago area at the moment. Trains have traditionally gone into Chicago as a hub. If they're coming from Michigan to go to Wisconsin, they go into Chicago and go back out. That causes quite a lot of consternation with traffic. It's if you have 150 cars, you're going to cross a number of streets. And there's always been a big argument about whether these trains could be circled around Chicago. And in order to do that, you have to use rail beds that are not used a lot. They're sort of privatized lines or service lines, and they have to be upgraded. But there's a lot of local opposition to this, and there's a lot of people that are very pleased to have these trails. So the railroaders may have a difficulty coming back in 15, 20, 100 years' time. And truly, the right-of-way may be a different railroad cat. So there is debate there, and you should know that. This is basically to preserve a railroad bed between Banner and Danville, in case there be industry or something different happen. And it's a debate then, because there's a lot of money being spent on this, including local money to buy the bed in the first place. The railroads have the right to come back in. But if you look at the structure that you're riding on, it's a lot of input. If you have the reason to do something different with the railroad, that's probably can be justified to say, well, bicyclists, you've had it for 100 years. We need to put back a railroad. So you have to think about those things, and that's part of what was being talked about yesterday. Sometimes the rail trail people don't always realize where their money is coming from. So some of the rail trail lawyers speak at rail trail meetings to ask people, to beg people to not throw rotten tomatoes and eggs at an incoming railroad if it has to come in, because this is where you got your money in the first place to do this. So sometimes the railroad side of things has not been stressed very much, and so the public cannot be castigated for not realizing that this is also involves railroads.
So if I'm following what you just said, people get upset if someday the railroads come back and say, okay, we want to pay to turn this back into a profitable railroad again. But what people have forgotten is, okay, it cost $3 million to put in the little bit of the 7 miles that go to St. Joseph. It would have cost a lot more than that if they had to actually buy that property outright, correct?
No.
Whoops. Yeah. I'm sorry. My understanding was we have a long-term lease, permanent if the railroads don't want to come back. But
they've had to pay a legitimate price. Usually it's a half of the adjacent
the value
farming.
of the adjacent.
So if you're farming, selling at 6,000, you will buy at about 3,000 an acre. And if you have a 100-foot wide territory for a mile, that would be 12 acres. So yes, you're paying real money for this railroad bed.
$3 million is not imaginary money, but again, maybe I'm wrong here. But I thought
the $3 million is not for buying the line. The $3 million is called enhancement money, and it's allowing helping the bicycle people to be able to run a trail on that to the advantage of the railroad. You have to realize that to go through something like a Chicago suburb with a railroad in the future, when you have to take down buildings, and it could cost much more than the $12 million that's being put between Urbana and Danville. It's 25 miles. So, yeah, that's good that you asked that question, because I think other people are not always realizing the relationship between the trail and the railroads. There are questions that get asked about this. One is, can you have a motor-assisted bicycle? Well, yes, you can, but only if you contain the speed of the bicycle to 15 miles an hour. So you can do that. There are headquarters at E10. David mentioned the Walmart area on 130, and it's called sometimes University Avenue, but usually University Avenue goes straight out on a road that drops into 74. It's more logical, I think, to regard that highway as Route 150. So 150 and the south route is 130 South. It's a high cross road, and it has other names at other places, but it goes almost dead straight south to Arcola and Charleston and Mattoon. I'm trying to think of other questions that arise. Both St. Joe and Urbana have been thinking about the headquarters that you get at those locations. St. Joe has gotten grant money to develop a park that is quite near. And so you see that the effort of putting quite a bit of money, local money as well as state and federal money into this project, all of a sudden cascades other grants. And they may be for toilets, maybe for sitting accommodation, maybe to facilitate local businesses. I was wondering if anyone was going to rent bicycles for this event. So I realized that bicycle rental is not easy. It's you have to have repair of bicycles, and they're sometimes used roughly. So at the outset, you probably don't make a lot of money out of renting bicycles. It's more an affair for contribution of public service. But if you're on something like the Katy Trail, which is 200 miles long, I'm sure that the people who service and rent bicycles are not doing that just for the public service. So you need a relatively rough, tough bicycles that will stand up to rail surface that is fairly tough. So it's not all these users, it's the type of material that you're going through. But both at the St. Joe area, there's a development, and I have to congratulate the mayor there. She's replaced BJ. BJ has been around for 30 years, and he's gone through this whole process, meeting after meeting, and he spoke. And he pulled a raffle card. They raffled a fat-tired bicycle, and you have to know that the fat tire was like 3 inches across. It was very, very bulky. And I came back late at the night, and I was following a van that had 2 bicycles on the back, and I thought, well, I'm taking a record of this, and I'd been taking photographs of Full's elevator with the moon behind. It was getting late. And I followed this vehicle through, and then I got to be parallel and asked if they could stop so I could take a photograph of the bicycles on the back. They thought I was asking them about the fat-tired bicycle because they had won the raffle. So inside the van was this big bicycle, and they have children that can use this. So it was too difficult to unload the bicycles. So I took a photograph of it in its place. But I thought it was kind of fun that people were coming back late at night, and they were actually walking and riding with their flashlights on, or headlights on. And people were stopping. I was on the prairie, and I was very, very pleased to be there. I found New Jersey tea, which is a good indication that this is a remnant prairie. And it's ripe at the moment, so we actually need people to help pick seed. I had a retired doctor who came by, and he would like to help. And somebody had a flat tire, and he was from Danville, and there were 4 of them. And it wasn't the cause of the gravel. He was using a bicycle. He hadn't used these tires on it for a while, so he had a flat for his own concern, not because of the surface of the ground. But he was a professional, and he was timing how long it took him to replace his tire. He had a spare tube, and it's 6.5 minutes. He was on his way again. There were other people walking. There were people who were family style, Ma and Pa and the kids. And many of them probably didn't realize that that little piece of prairie from the bridge out to Pioneer Grain is reasonably undisturbed soil, and we're very lucky to have that. And that piece is included in dedication to Heartland Pathways. At some places, we have drainage problems where this is a very flat country or very flat region, and Champaign especially is flat. So, where does the water run? And it runs into the Salt Fork, and so that has other ramifications. So I will digress for a little while because I went to an irrigation meeting, and that was rather interesting. That bridge that you passed over of the Salt Fork, George Rokamp was. This is a panel of people: Rokamp, Bullard, Paxton, Ferguson, and a journalist named Houston was moderating this at the library. And George Rokamp was saying that a lot of the water that's coming off of the Bloomington Moraine is going into the Salt Fork and actually sinking into the aquifer. They don't know quite how much, but we have a little prairie on the Bloomington Moraine, and one of the problems is that the Bloomington Moraine is gravelly, and it heats up sooner in the spring, and it can be irrigated. And then the big concern is that agricultural irrigation takes a huge amount of water out of the aquifer. This is really good pure water, and it is. We've spoken about this some before, but it's often sprayed onto the plants, and that means it's huge evaporation. We haven't quite got down to the point where we can dribble water into the roots where they want it. It goes everywhere, and it's tremendously wasteful. Of all the water uses we have in this region, irrigation is by far the most important, and it tends to get mixed up with phosphates and nitrates and fertilizer in the soil, and then it ends up with a dead zone in the Gulf. So there are quite a few people who are rather concerned about what's happening to the water and how is it used, and different states have different rules. And in California, Jack Paxton was wanting to say that so much water has been taken out of the aquifers that the land has dropped, perhaps several feet in some cases. And you can't use this water forever. If you go to Tucson, Arizona, you're taking out historic water that can't be replaced. So do we use it here and now and to heck with the future, or do we have some ways of saving it? So Ferguson was looking at how plants use water. Some plants are water guzzlers. And so what is the genetic gene pool behind this? Can you have a plant with fewer stomates and fewer loss of water and fewer transpiration, evaporation? Yes, you can. So then we need our gene pool around, and our gene pool is gone, 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 gone. And so we have to think about sharing our lives with future generations. So Bullard was interested in things like toilets. The technology, how do you use water at your home? It used to be that you pull a cistern that was up above your head in old times, and it fell into there was like 4 or 5 gallons of water there. But you only need about a gallon at most to flush the toilet. You don't even have to do that. If it's brown, you flush it down. If it's yellow, let it mellow. So the Australians have a thing where the water you wash your hands in stands on top of the cistern, and then it gets used later. So there's processes here that are helpful. And then there is the matter of communication about this. Do you know about irrigation? Do you know about the journalists? Do they know about this sort of thing? Is this investigation type journalism? So do you have to have someone who has a science background who knows how to find where the water is? So now when you go back to the trail, some of these things are the things you have to think about. You have to think about the railroad line is the only place where we have any genetic material left. You have to think about the corners on the side. You have to see those irrigation. They're often circles. If you go to Nebraska where the Ogallala aquifer is being dried up, you can look from the plane and there's these circles all over the place. and it's using and abusing water. And this is going to be liquid gold in the future. There are so many people wanting to drink, and if you're not very careful, you can put algae and fertilizer together, and you can generate deadly material, and people die with this sort of diet. I have to even think about the Sweet Corn Festival. We all eat X amount of corn, and is that good to have such a diet of a monoculture? What's good for your brain? Do you have the biodiversity? Do you run cattle that you eat meat and it takes X amount of water to generate the pasture that cow is on that you're going to eat? Can we go to the farmer's market and think about buying vegetables and primary material that doesn't have added sugar, added salt, added fat? Can we have something that's more natural? How does that grow in soils of East Central Illinois? So when you're going on this trail, it's a little boring. It's straight as a die, and it goes adjacent to roads that came later, and adjacent to abandoned interurban line. They all ran adjacent to the railroad line in the first place. You can't really easily go through somebody's farmer field. So think of the things that are going on in that cornfield. Does the corn have rolling leaves? What do rolling leaves say to you? Well, they say the leaf is rolling in order to keep the leaf from losing evaporation. So you can tell when the crop of corn is near to drought. So can you see that as you ride along? So I saw someone at Fulls that came out of the house nearby with a young daughter, and they're interested in finding out what they have always been taking photographs of along the line, but this is getting more sophisticated. So yes, let's look at this plant. What is there a Maximilian sunflower out at the moment? Yes. Are there black-eyed Susans? Where the restoration prairies are, there are black-eyed Susans because they're diplomats. People see them, but they aren't exactly what I would plant in a prairie because I know they're a diplomat. But I want other plants to come, and I have to say, when talking at the opening, I had to say, be patient. It will take 10 years to get back a facsimile of a prairie. But there's young people learning about it. We have to relate to people who are not sure about having a trail through their territory. So how do you interact? How do you talk to each other? It's almost essential to speak, because sometimes you have a tradition of mowing and cleanliness, and a tradition that really started a lot after World War II and the invention of a rotary mower, and you could mow in a more effective way, and so I'm watching all the time that the amount of mowing, and right next to the mowing there may be a prairie crop that could come out if it weren't mown. So how do we go about talking to people who have grown up with these trails, and the rail trail movement has a common name for this challenge. It's called the rape and mayhem syndrome. And you even see it happening in Champaign. on just Park Street, a whole bunch of privets have been removed. And I think it's because privets catch garbage, and then it has to be removed. So it's been replaced by rows of rinky-dink grasses that don't have the same character and don't have the same capacity to work with the environment. And all around the assembly hall, similar hedges have been taken out. So you have to know that these trails are valuable to some people, especially for recreation. That's if you dominate recreation. But they're good for a whole bunch of other things. I had to say something about the fellow who's at the Salt Fork Creek. He was fishing, and he was fishing because his grandfather said at this time of the year the puddles grow a little smaller and the fish get a little more concentrated, and you can actually go fishing and very successfully go fishing in the Salt Fork. That's if it's clean. That's if it doesn't have a lot of phosphorus and nitrogen and other materials, especially herbicides and insecticides that run down into that river. Do you dare drink it? I think if in the years when people would go swimming in a meandering stream, I don't think you can do that anymore. It's, you're afraid of what's coming down in that stream. So I was pleased to be communicating with the irrigation people, because it's right out there where you're riding. If you're a historian, you think about Lincoln, and a Lincoln Trail which runs about sometimes a mile south, sometimes 3 miles south, and it's where you waddle your way across the country and follow the streams, because the early settlers came up the rivers before there was railroads, and the mayor of St. Joe was saying that St. Joe was 1 mile south of where St. Joe is now, because the railroad came by, and everyone moved to the railroad. And it is interesting that the involvement in the overall trail sponsored the St. Joe to decide that they wanted asphalt through their town, and they got grant money or made arrangements with the Forest Preserve to put in asphalt. Just a little bit more sophisticated than it's there. I'm looking at the time here. So now I came back home, and parked around the corner was a wagon, and this wagon carries 15 people, and you'd have to have at least 8 people, and they ride bicycle style. So I started to talk. The wagon had stopped because it was somebody's birthday, and they were going to the Blind Pig to celebrate for a little while. But the bar person that was on this was there to protect the drinks and to protect the machine. But I'm thinking this is also a bicycle, and I'm thinking that we need a trail guide which starts at Main Street, and you'd have to have someone from the Forest Preserve ride as an interpreter, but also to take down the bollards. The bollards are blocks so that cars can't move onto the trail. So someone has to unlock the bollard. It lies down flat, and it's only 3 inches high, so you don't hit your sump as you go over. But this is just dreaming. I would like to have a photographer on the front of this machine. It's only 7 miles, and you don't have to show all the film that you take, but you would stop at a certain place. So there's John Deere. where does John Deere fit into the prairie? John Deere invented a plow that plowed this soil, this fairly heavy soil. It needed a moldboard to turn it over. This prairie was very big sod and hard to work with early. So John Deere had a shearer that went under the sod and a coulter to cut the sod, and then he rolled it over. So you had a long, thin, a curly moldboard which pressed the sod down. So there's the John Deere subunit at Cottonwood, and you can say, hi, there's part of our history and our development and our income. And then you go a little further and you find some swampy area where it doesn't really drain. So you have to think about drainage. You have to say, okay, so there's Behringer's Commons, there's Aldi's, the water runs through under the 130 and goes down a long piece of what was the interurban line, then it ducks under the railroad line, and then it goes through by John Deere, and it has to go to the Salt Fork, and it has to go through farm fields. It has to, or used to probably, have grassed waterways. But grassed waterways can make money for corn, so sometimes grassed waterways disappear. So how do you get this water under 74 down to the Salt Fork? So there you can stand and dream for 20 minutes about what's happening to the water, and then how does the Department of Transportation and the Department of Natural Resources talk about this. So, okay, so then you go up to Mayview, and there's Mount Olive Cemetery, and there's history, and there's all the names. Are these people Germanic, or are they Swiss, or Irish, or who's who around here? And what did they do? And sometimes it's kind, the tombstones will say something about what these people do. And right lately, people are doing sandblasting and blasting a little of the history of the person on to the tombstone. So you actually see the tractor that he used to drive, or the plane that he used to fly, or what she used to do as a house person, and how the relationship is. So sometimes you see the Ma and Pa and the names of all the children. So you can wander around that cemetery. It's a little higher because that's a little bit more aesthetic. It's a cane where some of the you had a little rivulet coming through the ice that was there. And there's Mr. Fulls, and it was Fulls Elevator. We were up the road, and Mr. Fulls used to breed horses. And so the thing that David was talking about, a little kiosk was explaining, and there's a picture of a draft horse. And you have to think about draft horses. I grew up with draft horses, and they get to be a friend of the family. They're part of the establishment. Can you imagine a horse? Are there horses these days? Where do you go ride a horse? How do you get to know a horse? How do you get to know a cow? We complain about too many meat cows, but you also have to think about milk cows. Is this a Swiss, or a Jersey, or a Guernsey, or a Friesian, a Holstein? Is it a beef cow? Black Aberdeen Angus, or how gregarious is this animal? How is it bred? And think about these things, and don't just go past these farmlands and without thinking about their agriculture and how it comes to you. You buy most of your food in packages, okay. That's drainage. Then there's bicycles themselves. So I came Saturday morning. I discovered that the Habitat for Humanity was running a bicycle event. It wasn't a race, it was an event, and it was for funding for the bicycle group. It was on Griggs in a banner, and the Sweet Corn Festival had closed the road, so I had to go past Griggs. So I stopped, and there are tents for registration. There is a tent for Champagne Bicycle, and there was Davis, who owns Champagne Bicycle, with a tent, and he was repairing bicycles. He had a special stand. And David probably knows much more about this than I, but there were a lot of people there. And so he had a portable stand that you could fold up and take to somewhere, and they had stands for parking bicycles, they had recumbent bicycles, they had a photographer who's photographing the bicyclists, and they had food, and they had these huge pots of oats, because oats sticks to your ribs, and apparently that's someone who's on the board of the Habitat for Humanity was running the food booths, and one of the first things he said when a bicycle person came in was, "There's oats." and there were people with different bicycles. There were people with dogs, and I found it to be rather interesting that these people were taking off. Some of them were going to go 27 miles, some of them were going to go 70 miles. And they were all going to use the Kickapoo Trail. And I thought that was rather wonderful. And David might know a little bit more about some of these events. This is not an event where you're racing. Tell us a little bit about the difference between a bicycle race and a bicycle event.
I can't tell you a whole lot. I've never actually been part of a bicycle race. I like to go out and bicycle on my own. I'll tell you, on the way to St. Joe, I actually did something I never normally do. At Weaver Park, where many of us set out from to start on the trail, this elderly gentleman, headed off on his own before other people, and I asked if he wanted some company. And I even told him I'm usually a solitaire bicyclist, but I spent the entire time keeping his pace, a modest 14 miles an hour. He had a bike computer that told him how fast he was going, and that was a little bit slower than I would have normally gone. I would have gone 16, 17, 18 miles an hour on the trail. I don't think you would normally use the Kickapoo Trail for an actual race. It's excellent exercise, but typically races are on paved roads that you close off. You don't want to have to compete with traffic. For example, if you ever watch any part of the Tour de France, which was last month, you would see they close it down over 100 miles of some main road so that the bicyclists can start in one point, go from road to road to road.
That was happening yesterday too.
Okay, yeah.
There are danger points that you know about, and so they usually put someone on those sites. And it's also important that the people don't get confused and take the wrong road.
Yes, well, I will say there is a huge advantage to the Kickapoo Trail over my usual route when I would go, for example, into a 15 or 25-mile bike ride. If I was doing that, I would normally be out on country roads. And especially this time of year with the corn not harvested yet, every time you go a mile and there's an intersection, you're taking your life into your own hands because there's traffic and yes, it's just dangerous. So the huge advantage to riding 7 miles to St. Joseph and turning around and coming back, there's almost no chance of car interactions. About every mile, there is a country road that does come out to Highway 150. So you do have to be careful. The entire time from here to St. Joe and back, I saw exactly one car at one of those intersections. So it's very, very, very safe. This is easily the way to get out there if you're walking, if you're bicycling. No motorized vehicles. Just get out there and use your own power on this thing. And it was blissful. The scenery is kind of what you're used to seeing around here. It's still corn and soybeans for the most part. But it is so much safer than being out and trying to go that same distance on country roads.
It's interesting you were saying you were traveling with an older gentleman. People who have been riding bicycles for all their lives don't realize that when you get older, you lose your balance some. And this is a very pleasant trail for them because you don't have to be looking at behind you with a rear view mirror to see whether you happen to get off the road and then fall into a 6-inch bump. If that happens to an elderly person, they can break their bones. And but in other ways, in Belleville, there's a hospital near a trail, and they have the trail all labeled. They have heart people using the trail, and so you can walk for 100 feet, or you can, so the doctor can give you a trail prescription as you come back from a heart operation or whatever. So there's a health side of things. Plus, it's just ambiance, just being out there and talking to each other. And so I was talking a lot to people after they had ridden, and I was out there on the prairie and pleased to be so to see. Well, it's getting to be the end of the time. It goes fast. Let me tell you that I got a letter from PSCC. PS is Prairie States Conservation Coalition, and they're awarding us $500 to do to encourage someone where they work with to do pictures and to give you a trail guide. So I thought that might go with the idea of the bicycle wagon that would go out. Cool. So this has been Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board. And as always, the views and opinions expressed are solely those of the speakers.